beginning verses of this text, Hebrews chapter 12. But while you're doing that, if you will, please give attention to some definitions that I would like to read from my edition of Webster's Second College Edition New World Dictionary. It looks like that because I've had it for quite a while. I noticed the copyright date is 1978, Ricky, so I might have had this since I've been in high school, I'm not sure, or shortly thereafter. But nonetheless, there are some reasons that I have held on to it. I've got an app now that I use on my phone, but this is old reliable. And so if you would, listen closely as, first of all, we read Webster's entry for the verb endure. Endure. He says literally, it conveys to harden, hold out, or last. And then by application and definition, number one, to hold up under. And then he offers examples such as pain or fatigue, to stand, to bear, to undergo. Secondly, a similar verb, persevere. Persevere. Again, listen. Listen as we read some of the entries for persevere. The definitions include, for instance, to continue in some effort, course of action, etc. Notice, in spite of difficulty, opposition, etc. To be steadfast in purpose, to persist. Also, under the noun, perseverance, Webster says this. He goes, it is the act of continued, patient effort. So, hearing those definitions, would you agree that endurance, perseverance, these are admirable qualities? Would you also concur that they are needed qualities? Friends, I think most of us recognize there are so many areas of our lives where the ability to finish, to endure, to persevere to the end is so critical, very important, so imperative. Again, many examples could be offered, but think with me about marriage. Marriage begins with the bride and the groom making vows to one another in which they, before God, family, and friends, pledge their love, themselves, one to the other, promising to faithfully continue in this marital covenant until death parts them. Can you see the need for endurance? Perseverance? What about parenting? We just mentioned parents and grandparents. Those of us who have had the privilege of being parents, we recognize that is a role that brings multiple challenges. Oh, yes, it has incomprehensible joys, but it can make you wearied. It can bring fatigue to the best of parents. Sadly, there are parents who throw up their hands, essentially, and quit the task. But would you agree? Parenting is one of those areas of our lives wherein endurance, perseverance are so very important. Yes, even necessary. But again, we can talk about any goals in the field of education, of a career, other ventures that we make in life. How important, how indispensable is endurance, perseverance. The opposite. Failing to finish what we have started. Lacking endurance, perseverance, unwilling to undergo, to hold up under difficult and challenging circumstances, that is often perceived as unbecoming, as seen by others. It can bring a sense of dishonor. I was thinking about what Jesus used by way of a parable in trying to impress upon those who were then following him to be his disciples. We often speak of it as Jesus' teaching on counting the cost. You remember that? Look over in Luke chapter 14 if you'd like to read along. In Luke chapter 14, we discover Jesus, verse 25, there went great multitudes with him. He turns, he said unto them, If any man come to me and hate not his father and his mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Whosoever doth not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, now here's an illustration. Which of you, intending to build a tower, sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it, lest haply, after he hath laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, all that behold it begin to mock him. One commentator said, quote, the unfinished building will stand as a monument to his folly, his lack of good judgment, and deliberation in the affair. And again, what was it that Jesus was illustrating? Our following him. Our discipleship. It demands a great deal. It costs. If we are unable to finish it once we have begun, it brings a sense of dishonor. And so as we asked before, do we not see in many areas of life the need for endurance, perseverance? Let's specify one. What about running the Christian race? Running the Christian race. Essentially, that's what Jesus was talking about when he was talking about those who follow him, come after him. Elsewhere in Scripture, this is analogized to running a race. Jesus says, there's need to persevere. You need to endure. And as we discovered from the definition of those terms, we understand that means to do it in spite of difficulties, challenges, opposition. We still need to endure. And that's what this series of sermons is all about. And again, the title of the series is taken from our text there in Hebrews chapter 12, where the inspired penman in writing to these Hebrew Christians who were on the verge of quitting the race. They were on the verge of abandoning their discipleship to Jesus. So the appeal is made to endure, to persevere to the end. Starting there in verse 1, wherefore seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight, the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience. That word in the King James, patience, really carries with it the idea of endurance, perseverance, and that becomes evident from what verse 2 goes on to say by way of encouragement, a prescribed, if you will, strategy for doing this. But again, let us run with patience, endurance, perseverance, the race that is set before us. From that very exhortation, would we not readily concur? Running the Christian race, it requires endurance. It necessitates perseverance. So here, the inspired penman offers a strategy for that. Looking unto Jesus first. That's what will prove effective in enduring to the end, persevering to the finish line, so that we can be crowned victorious as runners in the Christian race. Now, again, that's where we take our thought, and specifically, we're asking, well, what value is there in looking to Jesus to promote this endurance and perseverance that is needed on the part of every Christian runner? Obviously, one of the reasons is because he endured. Notice verse 2, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. He endured it. He persevered to the end, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. But what value is there? What wisdom is there in keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus as Christians, running the race, striving to get to the finish line and be crowned victorious? What is so important about keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus? And so we offered, first of all, by way of an answer, it is because of who he is. That's how the inspired penman began, looking unto Jesus. Here's who he is, the author and finisher of, again, the faith or faith. We talked about that. We also suggested this as to who Jesus is, as to why that would be so vital to our enduring to the end of the race, is because he's our perfect pattern. And not only that, but he is an empathizing example. Now we turn our attention to a second answer. Why is looking to Jesus so vital to enduring to the end in the Christian race and assuring our victory? It is because of what Jesus did to endure to the end, to assure his victory. And so, what did Jesus do? I want to quickly read some comments from Brother Milligan in his commentary on the book of Hebrews. Before we do that, let's read verses 3 and 4. For consider him, and just maybe in your mind, highlight that word for a minute. Consider him, that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest ye be wearied and faint in your minds. You have not yet resisted unto blood, striving against sin. Now again, the pronoun there, him, verse 3, for consider him, that's Jesus. That's the one we're to be looking to. And here Christians are urged to consider him. Why? Because he endured. Brother Milligan says, in commenting on these verses, quote, the inspired penman has still in view the foot races of the amphitheater, and from them he continues to draw his metaphors. As the knees of the contestants in the ancient arena were apt to grow weary, so also it is with those who run the Christian race. They too are apt to grow weary and faint in their minds. But, as in the Greek stadium, a forward look to one who had won the prize and who was then ready to crown other victors at the end of their race was apt to inspire the athlete with fresh courage and energy. So also it is in our Christian race. When the soul is bowed down under the manifold trials and afflictions of this life, nothing so much revives it as looking off to Jesus and carefully considering him who endured such contradictions of sinners against himself. So Brother Milligan suggests what the reason the inspired penman is urging us to look to Jesus is because in athletics, in sporting events, so often it is looking to somebody who has excelled in your sport, in your event, having already completed it, having already won. And that inspires renewed energy and courage to do the same. is there in actually looking to someone with admiration to gain inspiration because they have already excelled again in some event, in some activity that you want to excel in? What value is there? Let me ask you, is there any substantive value of just looking at them? Ricky, I'm sure as a young boy like myself, you had maybe aspirations of being an NFL quarterback. I know they have changed over the years. For me, it used to be Bart Starr and Fran Tarkenton. Johnny Unitas, go back far. Today, it's Tom Brady. Or maybe to be, I played a little league baseball, was never good. Tried to pitch, was terrible. But I wanted to be like a Clayton Kershaw today. And so you buy the posters, you put them up in your bedroom, you get the bobblehead dolls, you put them on your dresser. What substantive value is there every day to get up and say, I want to be like him? I want to be a Major League Baseball pitcher. Excellent. Isn't that just wishful thinking? To look to him and say, that's what I want to be like. Isn't that just pie in the sky fantasy? Thinking by getting up, looking at them every day, saying, that's what I want to be like, that really is going to bring about future success. I think all of us recognize that would be foolish thinking on the part of young boys or young girls. You see, if you're really serious, if you're holding up somebody, if you're looking to them as a role model, as an example, who again, yes, inspires aspiration and encourages emulation of them, if it promotes for you future success, it's only going to be because you seriously look to them. Not just look at a poster or a bobblehead doll. See, the only way looking to somebody who has already excelled and you want to excel like them, the only way that is going to prove helpful is to seriously consider them. You're going to have to study their life. You're going to have to read biographies about them. You have to watch films. You need to learn from them. What was their daily practice regimen? What were their habits? So that now I can imitate that in my efforts to, if you will, walk in their footsteps. I need to consider the obstacles that they had to overcome. I need to hear what they did to excel. And so I would suggest, in a similar fashion, that's what the inspired penman is urging us to do. That's why I ask you to highlight in your mind, if you will, that word consider. It's not just looking to in the sense of watching, but consider. Other translations say, exert every effort. Make every effort. It's interesting, if you would look at the original word here translated, you would see our word. The idea is you look at them and then try to compare what you're doing to what they did. An analogy, a comparison. It's a very serious consideration. Friends, it will necessitate our diligently, seriously contemplating what Jesus did so that he could endure, so that he could persevere, to the end, despite the obstacles, despite the challenges and the opposition, so that we can follow in his steps. Friends, if we are going to look to Jesus for inspiration, to endure to the finish, to victoriously win the Christian race, we must seriously consider him. Discovering what he did, we need then to try to imitate that to the best of our ability. We need to incorporate that into our daily discipline again, as well as we can. So, let's enumerate some things that Jesus did that no doubt contributed to his enduring to the end. And the first one, it's the only one we'll get to this morning, but the first one is he had a proper orientation. He had a proper orientation. Now, maybe that's not a word we use a lot today. I know in businesses we talk about orientation. Most of us, if you started for any large corporation, and that was true for me, when I got my job, we had an orientation. It was designed to acquaint us with the business, with the company, with what was required of us. But when you look at the word itself, it's interesting, and I suggested one of the reasons that I've held on to this worn-out version of Webster's Second College New World Dictionary is because I love the etymologies that it offers, where this word comes from, and how it has evolved throughout our usage of it. And that's true for orientation. Do you hear the word orient? When we hear Orient, what do we think of? East, right? Those eastern nations, the Orient to the east. That's really where it came from. The idea of position to the east. Now, from there, again, it went on to mean other things. There was a broader application. But initially it meant to arrange with reference to the east, or to set in agreement with the points of the compass. Now, in my job, I find freight that should have been put up in its proper place and has not for some reason. Many times the reason it hasn't been put up is because it's laying on the floor. And somebody knocked it over. They don't know where it goes. And so I'm responsible for picking it up, putting it back on the pallet, and putting it into its position. But here's one thing you got to be careful about. The orientation of the box. See, these boxes have different dimensions. In the system, those dimensions are measured height, length, and width. And if the height is 5 inches in the system, well then, the system's looking for a slot that it'll fit in. But if the system is 5 inches and the unloader puts it at a 7-inch orientation, in other words, they set the box up instead of down, guess what? It doesn't fit in the slot. There's another reason sometimes it doesn't get put away, is because the driver gets up there, it doesn't fit, put it back down, drive to the next one. I'm out there looking for these. Orientation, boy, I spent a lot of time on orientation. I'm trying to orient the box correctly. Now, that brings us to the broader application of this term, to orient or orientation. Listen to it. To adjust with relation to facts or principles. See, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to adjust the box, the cart, in relationship to certain facts, how tall it's supposed to be. Right? And it is in that way that I would suggest this is the first thing that Jesus did. The first thing that he did to promote endurance and perseverance to the end of his course. He had a proper orientation. What I mean by that is Jesus oriented himself to the facts pertaining to his true purpose for coming to this earth. He set, Tanya, if you will, he set his moral compass to that purpose, and he would not waver from Jesus did this quite early in his life. Let me invite you back to an incident that we have, really one of very few in Jesus' early life. Look at Luke chapter 2, please. Luke chapter 2. Friends, Jesus set his sight on the goal that was to be achieved, and then he consistently, conscientiously, diligently, resiliently followed that course until it was reached. Again, this orientation on the part of Jesus, it was announced very early by him. Look there in, again, Luke chapter 2, you might remember Jesus is now 12 years of age. And so his parents, mother and Mary and Joseph, they take him along with them to Jerusalem on one of the feasts. And on their return journey back to Nazareth, they thought Jesus was in their company. A couple days out on their journey, or a day out, they discovered Jesus isn't there. He wasn't among their relatives. And so they're frantically returning to the city of Jerusalem, trying to find their 12-year-old, very special son in that crowded city. The Bible tells us they looked for 3 days. Maybe that involves some travel time, but still, you can only imagine as a parent the anxiety, the fears, the doubts that might be going through Mary and Joseph's hearts. And so when they do find him, they find him in the temple, conversing with the religious teachers of the day. You might remember the rebuke that his mother had for him at the end of verse 48. Son, why have you thus dealt with us? Behold, your father and I have sought thee sorrowing. To which the young Jesus said, how is it that you sought me? Listen to it. Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business? Friends, here is a 12-year-old boy who had a proper orientation. He had fixed his moral compass on why he was here. And he's expressing, if you will, surprise that his mother and father had not discerned that yet. And you might remember, because of that proper orientation, no surprise of what we read in verse 52, right? And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. With that kind of orientation, I'm here to do my Father's business. You can understand that kind of growth, right? And so, friends, that orientation was never lost upon Jesus. I must be about my Father's business. That's why I'm here. That purpose defined who he is. Friends, that constituted the supreme governing factor in making whatever decisions he did as he journeyed through this earthly pilgrimage. In fact, frequently, Jesus affirmed this to be his orientation from which he would not waver. Just a few examples of that, all from the book of John. Think about John chapter 4, the woman at the well. You remember that? After she left to go tell the other townspeople of who she encountered at the well, his disciples returned with food. They urged her, Master, eat. And Jesus says, I have meat that you don't know of. They're thinking physically, they're thinking, who brought him food in our absence? And Jesus had to explain it. Listen to it. Jesus said to them, my meat is to do the will of him that sent me. Finish his work. Jesus was tired. Jesus was hungry physically. But all of those desires were lost upon him because of his orientation. I'm here. And really what sustains like food sustains my physical body, what sustains me, essentially, my Father's business. I'm here to do that. I'm here to finish that. John chapter 6, Jesus having that discussion, again with those who had found him on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, He's trying to impress upon them, I am the bread of heaven. They're looking for physical bread that he had provided them. On the other side, in the miraculous feeding of the 5,000, he's trying to impress upon them, I am the bread of heaven. And they're questioning, he came from heaven. I thought we know his father. I thought they're from Nazareth. And Jesus had to remind them of his orientation. He said, I came down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him that sent me. See, I've got to be about my Father's business. That's why I'm here. That's my orientation. I cannot veer from that. Again, in John chapter 8 and verse 29, Jesus would say, he that sent me is with me. The Father hath not left me alone, for I do always those things that please him. That was Jesus' orientation. And friends, I would submit that was the first thing that contributed to his enduring to the end. He had that proper orientation. He was not going to veer from it. Now, it is true sometimes he more specifically identified what that orientation would eventually accomplish, such as when he visited with Zacchaeus, the chief tax collector in the city of Jericho. You remember that? He said, for the Son of Man is come. Here's why I'm here. Keep this relationship according to the facts. I am here seeking to save that which is lost. That's why I'm here. That's my purpose. I can't veer from that. That's why I'm here. Now, friends, there were times where, having announced his purpose, it was countered by even those who were close to him, even those that would have been considered his closest associates, his friends. And they tried to discourage him in it. They didn't understand it. And so as Jesus stated his orientation and where that eventually would lead and necessitate, they're trying to dissuade him from it. Remember that occasion in Matthew chapter 16? Jesus had just asked his disciples there in Caesarea Philippi, whom do men say that I am? Who do you say that I am? Peter answers correctly. Jesus pronounces a blessing upon Peter for recognizing this. But then it's what follows, starting in verse 17. Starting in verse 21. From that time forth, Jesus began to show to his disciples how that he must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things of the elders and priests, chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised again the third day. See, my orientation is going to bring about that because I'm here to seek and to save the lost. That's what it necessitates. He's trying to prepare them for that. And you remember how that was met by Peter? The one that had just been committed. Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be. Here is one of his closest associates. He's trying to remain true to his orientation. And he's trying to help them to understand it. And here is Peter saying, that will never happen. We won't let it happen. But notwithstanding their efforts to persuade them, Jesus helped Peter understand, you're not thinking the way you should. You're not thinking according to my orientation. Friends, there were times, Jesus having taken on humanity, there were times that Jesus himself began to think about the challenges that he was going to face, staying the course, reaching the goal, completing where his orientation was pointing him. And he had to be reminded, that is my orientation. I have to complete it. One example of this is John chapter 12. Listen to the language. In John chapter 12, Jesus is now nearing the end of his earthly ministry. Chapter 13, John chapter 13, we're in the upper room with his apostles. He knows the hour is drawing near. And listen to what he says, John 12:27. It's almost as though Jesus is entertaining this in his mind and he speaks it publicly. But here's what he says, now is my soul troubled. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? See, that was what he was contemplating. He was pondering, should I pray to my Father to deliver me from this hour? See the challenge? As he's contemplating what this entails. Listen to him coming back to his orientation. But for this cause came I unto this hour. That's why I'm here. That's my purpose. That's my orientation. How then can I pray for the Father to deliver me? And the most classic example of that is in Jesus in the garden. What did he say? Father, if it be possible, let this pass from me. But not my will. Why was he here? What was his orientation? I got to do my Father's business. And whatever that entails, I've got to complete that. I've got to finish. I've got to carry that. So, let me ask you, what's the practical application for us? What's it for us? Now, I suggest we, like Jesus, we need to early in our lives establish the proper orientation. Now, for some of us, early means now. Because maybe we're not young anymore. But whenever we come to understand, this is where it begins, a proper orientation. So what does that entail for me? Number one, I have to recognize, I have to embrace why I am even here on this earth. I told you our Wednesday night summer series, summer series. Wednesdays is life is meaningless without God. Study of the book of Ecclesiastes. If you have to know why you are here, study the book of Ecclesiastes. And when you get to the end, you'll find the answer to why you're here. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Solomon says, fear God, keep his commandments. This is the whole man. Friends, we are not here for education. We are not here to pursue a career. We are not here to start and raise a family. We are not here for financial gain. We are not here for happiness. We are not here for any other reason ultimately. Now, none of those in and of themselves are wrong, but none of them can be pursued as the purpose of this life in the absence of the true purpose, which is to fear God, keep his commandments. Friends, without that proper orientation, we will never persevere. We will never endure to the finish, because these other things are going to become distractions. These other things are going to take us off course from that orientation. That's the first thing we've got to do. We've got to imbibe that. We've got to embrace that. That's why we are here on this earth to glorify God. That's why we're here. Secondly, having embraced that, now we have to determine the supreme goal. And what is it? Is in our analogy, finishing the race. Crossing the finish line faithfully. That's my supreme goal in life, and I cannot waver from it. Now remember what Jesus had to endure? He had to have some who were very close to him express their disappointment in hearing that that's his goal.